The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of lilies and success, a heavy perfume that always made my head ache. It was my 25th birthday party, an event meticulously orchestrated by my mother to celebrate not just my birth, but my trajectory. Everyone important, the bank managers, the city councilors, the developers my father courted was here, their smiles wide, and their compliments practiced. I moved through the crowd, a perfect porcelain doll in a dress I hadn't chosen, playing the role of the appreciative daughter and soon-to-be partner. A stunning future awaits. Lily, Mr. Harrison. A man whose glasses perpetually slipped down his nose, boomed, clapping me heartily on the shoulder. Your father tells me the new promotion is well-deserved. Truly following in his impressive footsteps. Following, yes. Leading, never. That was the core of my discomfort. I was a talented architect. My designs were innovative, focused on sustainability and light. But I was trapped, drawing blueprints for buildings that served only to enlarge my father's already immense empire. Constructing monuments to his conventional taste. The firm was my gilded cage, beautiful from the outside but utterly confining. I yearned for the grit of creation, for projects that mattered, not just profit margins. I wanted to design a geodesic dome on a mountain peak, or perhaps a treehouse community in the rainforest, anything that didn't involve beige marble and corporate leases. Tom, my fiancé, a man as solid and predictable as reinforced concrete, slipped his arm around my waist, grounding me in his familiar, reassuring warmth. Don't let them wear you out, my love, he murmured, his gaze sweeping over the room with proprietary pride. He saw our life laid out before us, the corner office, the wedding next spring, the colonial house on Willow Creek. It was a perfectly sensible life, and the fact that it made my stomach churn was a secret I kept even from myself. The climax of the evening arrived after the cake cutting. My father, Richard Morgan, tapped a champagne flute with a knife, drawing the room into a hush. He spoke of legacy, of dedication, and finally, he raised a glass to me. Tonight, we officially welcome Lily to the executive fold, he announced, his voice booming with satisfaction. She is now vice president, head of design. The future of Morgan & Associates rests on her capable shoulders. Applause erupted. Champagne corks popped again. My smile felt frozen. The promotion was meant to feel like liberation, a reward for years of tireless effort, but it landed like a physical weight, pressing me deeper into the mold they had cast for me. I wanted to run, to scream, to simply vanish into the opulent wallpaper. I managed a shaky thank you, my voice barely audible over the din of well-wishers. It was in the post-announcement flurry that the moment of true change arrived. Mrs. Albright, Aunt Clara's former nurse and confidant, approached me hesitantly, holding a small, velvet-lined box. Aunt Clara, my late father's unconventional sister, had been the only truly free soul in the family. She traveled. She studied forgotten languages, and she collected things that other people called junk. She had passed away 6 months prior, leaving me nothing but a vague sense of unfinished conversation. She instructed me to give this to you exactly on your 25th birthday, Lily, Mrs. Albright said, her voice a low whisper. I opened the box. Nestled inside was a tarnished antique locket. It was crafted from dark, dull silver, shaped like a slightly irregular octahedron, unlike any jewelry I had ever seen. When I picked it up, it was shockingly cool, almost cold, against my palm. I turned it over, noticing a faint, intricate engraving, not a name or a date, but a complex, star-like geometric pattern that seemed to shimmer under the ballroom lights. For the first time all evening, the noise of the party receded. The weight of the promotion, the expectation in Tom's eyes, the smothering perfection of the room, it all faded. This small, cold object felt like a direct transmission from the irreverent, adventurous spirit of Aunt Clara. It was a piece of the life I had always craved, suddenly tangible in my hand. I know, Clara, I thought, clutching the locket tightly. I know this isn't my path. That strange, silent object, heavy with unknown history and a mysterious engraving, was more than just a piece of metal. It was a secret invitation. It was the spark of rebellion I needed, the first tremor against the perfectly constructed foundation of my sensible, uninspired existence. The gilded cage, I realized, finally had a loose hinge. The echoes of the party still clung to my apartment, a ghost of forced gaiety and expensive perfume. I had stripped off the suffocating silk dress, now just a discarded husk on the floor, and slipped into comfortable cotton. The weight of the evening, the congratulations, the corporate smiles, the suffocating finality of the vice president title, had been unbearable. Now, sitting alone at my kitchen island, the only thing that felt real was the tarnished antique piece lying on the granite countertop. It was heavier than it looked, solid and cold. I picked it up, rotating the slightly irregular octahedron between my thumb and forefinger. The faint geometric etching shimmered whenever the light caught it, not like mere decoration, but like a deeply encoded pattern. Aunt Clara hadn't given things without reason. Every eccentric gift from her was a riddle wrapped in curiosity. This object, unlike the expensive diamond necklace Tom had gifted me, felt significant, vibrating with the silent promise of the unknown. I ran a finger over the fine lines of the star-like design, tracing one spoke, then another. My mind, trained in architectural precision, automatically sought symmetry, but the pattern was subtly skewed. There was an imperfection, a tiny ridge, no bigger than the head of a pin, near one of the polished edges. I pressed it gently, expecting nothing. Click. The sound was shockingly loud in the silent apartment, a mechanical chime breaking the stillness, a hairline seam, previously invisible, parted near the base. I held my breath, my heart rate accelerating. I carefully widened the gap, and from the narrow recess, a delicate, brittle piece of parchment fluttered onto the counter. It was stained yellow with age, so fragile it seemed the slightest breeze might crumble it to dust. I handled it with the reverence of an archaeologist unearthing a priceless scroll. It was clearly a fragment, torn unevenly along one edge. The paper was covered in hurried, looping script, instantly recognizable as Aunt Clara's handwriting, and littered with symbols I didn't understand. Astronomical notations interspersed with what looked like ancient runic markings, but in the center, written clearly in bold ink, was a single, startling word, Aerthos, Erthos. It sounded like something out of a forgotten legend. A frantic, focused energy seized me. I immediately abandoned the architectural reports waiting on my laptop and plunged into my digital archive of Aunt Clara's correspondence and documents. I searched for the word, the symbols, anything connecting my eccentric aunt to the fantastical notion of a hidden place. I found nothing direct, but digging through her travel itineraries and bank statements from the last year, the one before her death, a pattern emerged. Multiple trips to the northern coast, repeated payments to a surveyor in a small fishing town, and a final, substantial purchase, referenced only as the keeper's land. A quick cross-reference with local land records provided the answer. An old, decommissioned lighthouse on a rocky, isolated peninsula, abandoned for decades and known locally for its unsettling history. The last transaction recorded had been Aunt Clara's, 6 months before she passed. She had purchased the lighthouse. The revelation settled over me like a cold blanket. Aunt Clara hadn't been merely eccentric. She had been secretive, involved in something far deeper than I ever imagined. The map fragment, the cryptic word, the isolated lighthouse, it wasn't a coincidence. It was a carefully constructed breadcrumb trail, leading specifically to me. Just then, the front door clicked open. Tom walked in, shedding his jacket and tie, bringing the solid reality of my conventional world back into the room. "Still awake, Lily? I thought you'd be asleep, ready for your big day tomorrow," he said, his tone kind but faintly patronizing. He saw the parchment and the locket on the counter, his brow furrowing with gentle disapproval. "I found something," I explained quickly, pushing the brittle paper toward him. "It fell out of Clara's locket. Look, the lighthouse. She bought it." He glanced at the paper, then back at me. He didn't touch the fragile parchment. "It looks like nonsense, Lily. Something your aunt used to amuse herself. She was known for being, well, theatrical." He gathered the glasses and empty champagne flutes, his back turned to the mystery. "Throw it away. You need to focus. Tomorrow you start building your legacy, remember? This romantic treasure hunt is just a distraction." His casual dismissal stung more than any argument could have. It wasn't just the parchment he was invalidating. It was my desire for anything beyond the path he and my father had defined. He saw sentimentality where I felt purpose. He saw junk where I saw a key. "It's not a distraction, Tom," I insisted, my voice tight. "It's a clue. And I need to know what she was doing there." "You're a Morgan, Lily. You're an executive, not an amateur detective," he replied, finally turning, his expression softening into weary concern. "Please, darling, get some rest. We can talk about this after the initial design meeting. It can wait." But I knew it couldn't wait. The weight of the promotion had been lifted, replaced by the thrilling burden of this secret. Tom's inability to see the potential in the discovery, his immediate reflex to prioritize the firm, confirmed everything I feared about our shared future. With a resolute motion, I tucked the map fragment and the cool, heavy locket safely into my pocket. I wouldn't be talking about this after the design meeting. I would be gone long before then. The lighthouse was calling, and for the first time in years, the architect in me wasn't building someone else's dream. She was charting her own course. I left before dawn. The silence of the apartment was my accomplice, and I moved with the stealth of a thief, stealing back her own life. I wrote a brief, vague note for Tom, slipped the engagement ring onto his bedside table. The weight of that gesture was my Mendeland. Drove away from the city lights without a backward glance. The promotion documents, the blueprints for the glass tower, the entire Morgan legacy, they all felt like dust compared to the exhilarating, icy feel of the locket resting in my jacket pocket. The drive north was long, taking me from the manicured suburbs into the wild, untamed coastal landscape. Hours passed, marked only by the shifting quality of the light, from the pale promise of dawn, to the harsh, bright clarity of midday. The fishing town itself was a cluster of weathered buildings clinging stubbornly to the edge of the continent. It smelled of salt and decay, an honest scent that stripped away the pretense of my city life. I didn't linger. I just followed the map fragment's cryptic direction, which led me down a narrow, overgrown dirt track. Finally, the land opened up onto a rocky peninsula, and there it stood, the lighthouse. It was monumental, yet derelict, a mournful gray finger pointing accusingly at the indifferent sky. It was far more isolated, far more imposing, than the land records had suggested. The stone base was cracked, the white paint peeling like old skin, and the enormous glass lantern room at the top was shattered, allowing the wind to howl through the structure's spine. The place didn't just feel abandoned. It felt forgotten, intentionally excluded from the modern world. My heart pounded with a mixture of apprehension and triumph. This was the threshold. This was where Lily Morgan, the sensible architect, disappeared, and the seeker emerged. I found a heavy, rusted metal door at the base of the tower. It was locked, of course, but Aunt Clara, ever prepared, had included a small, oddly shaped skeleton key, taped inside the locket's velvet box. The key turned with a groan of protesting metal, and I slipped inside. The interior was a chill cavern of stone and shadow. The air was thick with the scent of damp moss and something metallic, like old pennies. A central spiral staircase of wrought iron wound upward, disappearing into the darkness of the high shaft. Cobwebs draped everywhere like macabre decorations. I pulled out my phone, using its light to navigate, and immediately noticed that the interior walls were not typical lighthouse masonry. They were lined with shelves built into deep recesses, mostly empty, but revealing clear signs of recent occupation. This wasn't just a neglected building. It had been a sanctuary, or perhaps a laboratory. I followed the only logical path, ascending the tight spiral, my hands gripping the cold, rough iron of the railing. Each step was a commitment, a definitive move away from my past. After climbing what felt like hundreds of feet past the engine room, past dusty storage chambers, I reached a landing just below the shattered lantern room. Here, a low wooden door stood slightly ajar. Inside, the room was small, circular, and surprisingly intact. This was Aunt Clara's secret study. Instead of maritime charts, the walls were covered floor to ceiling with bizarre maps, constellations overlaid with geological fault lines, astronomical cycles annotated with cryptic glyphs, and detailed drawings of impossible geometry. There were stacks of ancient books, with brittle pages, occult literature bound in cracked leather, and shelves filled with strange, smooth river stones, and polished obsidian. I walked slowly to the sturdy wooden desk in the center, my fingers trailing over the evidence of her obsession. She hadn't been studying the sea. She had been studying the structure of reality itself. A diagram of the solar system, drawn on thick vellum, caught my eye. The orbits were drawn in meticulous detail, but one particular planetary alignment was circled repeatedly, marked with the exact irregular star-like pattern engraved on my locket. I felt the cool metal warm instantly in my pocket. I pulled the locket out, and as I held it near the diagram, a low faint hum resonated from the object. It wasn't the sound of metal, it was the sound of energy. Following the sound, I turned and saw a section of the stone wall near the fireplace that was subtly different from the rest. A mosaic of perfectly fitted, smooth slate tiles. I placed the locket directly onto the central tile of the mosaic. The humming intensified, growing into a deep, sustained, thrumming vibration that I felt in my chest. The geometric patterns on the slate tiles began to glow with a faint, greenish light, radiating outwards from the locket. Then, with a sound like stone grinding against stone, a portion of the wall slid inward, revealing a small, secure vault. Inside, bathed in the beam of my flashlight, were two objects. The first was a thick, leather-bound journal, Clara's full account. The second was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. A small, intricately cut, geometric crystal that pulsed with a soft, ethereal light, throwing sharp, perfect refractions onto the vault's walls. It was unlike any mineral known to science. It was pure, distilled mystery. The silence in the lighthouse wasn't empty. It was waiting, I realized. Sinking onto the dusty floor, clutching the crystal and the journal. The crystal throbbed gently in my hand, a steady, hypnotic pulse. My life as a sensible architect, the life dedicated to logic and right angles, was officially over. I had found the heart of Aunt Clara's secret, and it was beating with unbelievable, impossible magic. I settled into a quiet, small cottage. I managed to rent just a few miles down the coast, far enough from the brooding presence of the lighthouse to feel safe, yet close enough that its shadow still seemed to loom over the landscape. I needed heat, strong coffee, and most importantly, silence, the deep, uninterrupted silence required to properly excavate Aunt Clara's hidden life. The leather-bound journal was heavy on my lap, its cover worn smooth by countless years of handling. Next to it, the faceted crystal pulsed with a captured, internal starshine, and the locket lay nearby, its dull metal now radiating a subtle, faint warmth that belied its mundane exterior. I opened the journal to the first page. It wasn't the frantic, rambling text of a madwoman, which my pragmatic side had half expected. Instead, the handwriting was precise, elegant, and infused with an academic authority that was utterly unsettling. The early entries spoke of astrophysics, dimensional mechanics, and forgotten mathematical models. Clara wasn't just a dreamer. She was a meticulous researcher who had simply extended her work beyond the acceptable boundaries of modern science. She had sought proof, not poetry. "My theory is elegant," she wrote in an entry dated over 3 decades ago. "Reality is not singular, but a complex, multi-layered structure, much like a poorly rendered 3-dimensional projection. We exist on one surface, but there are others, separated only by phase-an, almost imperceptible energetic difference. I believe I have found the key to bridging that gap." I read for what felt like endless hours, the words peeling back the layers of the world I thought I knew. Clara's life had been a singular obsession, a devoted pursuit of the realm she eventually named Erthos. She described it not as a magical fantasy, but as a parallel ecological system, rich in a unique, crystalline energy she called ether. "This world," she wrote, "existed just beyond our atmospheric curtain, accessible only when our planet and Erthos achieved a specific, highly improbable celestial alignment, an event that occurred only once every few decades. My rational mind, the mind that could calculate stress loads on high-rise structures in a matter of minutes, screamed in protest. Parallel worlds, ether. It sounded like something ripped from cheap, thrilling fiction. But then I looked at the intricately carved crystal sitting next to the page. The keystone, the journal called it, a focus for the dimensional rift. I looked at the dull silver locket in my hand. The tuning device, tuned precisely to the frequency of the last predicted alignment. I couldn't dismiss the objects. They were physical evidence that validated the extraordinary claims, a geometric equation rendered in stone and metal. Then the narrative shifted, becoming intensely personal and dark. Clara wrote that the Morgan family's enormous prosperity, our success in architecture and land development, wasn't just due to smart business, it was payment. A repayment for an ancestral debt, a magical debt dating back centuries. The family curse, the journal explained, wasn't bad luck or genetic predisposition. It was a slow, spiritual drain, a sense of perpetual hollowness, passed down through the generations, the exact emptiness I had felt choking me in the ballroom, the constant striving for something that never materialized. Our ancestor, she detailed in an entry written in a shaky, despairing hand, found Erthos first, but he only brought back immense knowledge and wealth, founding our dynasty, but he disrupted the Ethervel, the life force of that world. The lack of purpose we all feel, the endless striving for more, is the symptom of the debt. We are spiritually bankrupt, paying the price for his ancient transgression. A chill, deeper than the lighthouse masonry, ran through me. It explained so much. My father's relentless drive, his total satisfaction in acquisition, my own deep-seated feeling that I was perpetually missing something essential. It wasn't just ambition, it was a void. It was an inherited famine of the soul. I have to go back, Clara's final coherent entry stated, not to escape, but to repair. The alignment is approaching. Lily, if you are reading this, I did not succeed. You must take the keystone, and use the tuning device, to cross the threshold. Only a Morgan, someone equally connected to both worlds, can restore the veil, and free our bloodline from the curse. My hands trembled, not from cold, but from the sheer, stunning magnitude of the task. I wasn't just seeking adventure anymore. I was carrying the fate of a parallel world, and the salvation of my own family's soul. My architectural skills, my understanding of structure, balance, and the subtle ways geometry influences flow suddenly seemed incredibly relevant. If Erthos was a world whose lifeblood was a structured energy field, perhaps my unique training wasn't a distraction after all, but the essential tool. The sensible, cautious woman, who wrote the resignation note to Tom, was dissolving. She was being replaced by someone committed to an impossible, beautiful mission. I closed the journal, placing the keystone and the locket carefully beside it, then looked toward the window. The stars were beginning to fade, signaling the quick passage of time. I had a world to save, and a cosmic clock was ticking. I was ready to believe. I had to be. The night was cold and fiercely clear. I had spent the entire day reviewing Aunt Clara's calculations, correlating her astronomical charts with the present sky, and preparing myself mentally for the impossible. Tonight was the night of the celestial alignment, the precise moment when the two realities, Earth and Erthos, would momentarily overlap like two out-of-sync transparencies. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat, keeping time with the distant, thunderous rhythm of the ocean waves crashing against the rocks. I carried my essential gear. Clara's journal, the locket, the geometric keystone, and a powerful flashlight. Back inside the decaying lighthouse, the air felt charged, crackling with an unseen energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I climbed the dark spiral stairs, faster this time, drawn by an irresistible force to the circular room beneath the shattered lantern. I located the stone depression on the floor that Clara had meticulously described, a smooth, circular indentation exactly the size of the keystone. The moment I set the crystal in place, it pulsed violently, no longer with a soft glow, but with an intense, emerald light. The light didn't illuminate the room. It seemed to absorb it, creating a point of profound, otherworldly luminescence. The sound began almost instantly, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the very foundation of the tower. It was the sound of colossal machinery turning, of dimensions tearing. I clutched the silver locket, the tuning device, holding it directly above the keystone, as instructed by the final entries in the journal. I could feel the energy surging through the metal, conducting itself through my fingers and into the floor. As the clock neared the precise calculated moment, the humming crescendoed into a high-pitched, almost painful whine. The air thickened. It felt like pushing through dense liquid. Then, the center of the room, right above the glowing keystone, shimmered. It wasn't smoke, nor light, nor water. It was pure visual confusion, an iridescent blur of shifting greens, golds, and violets, swirling into a perfect, upright oval, a portal. Through the swirling colors, I could just make out a landscape, not the jagged rocks of the peninsula, but something suspended, floating, bathed in a strange, silvery light. I saw structures, to organic architecture that seemed to grow rather than be built, clinging to the sides of what looked like massive, moss-covered landmasses, drifting lazily in a luminous sky. It was breathtaking, impossible, and utterly real. Just as I took my first tentative step toward the swirling gateway, my phone shrieked a sound horribly discordant with the cosmic event unfolding before me. It was Tom. I almost ignored it, but the screen flashed his name, desperate and demanding. I knew I couldn't face him later, so I pressed the receive button, holding the phone loosely against my ear. "Lily, where are you?" His voice was frantic, laced with panic and barely suppressed anger. "You didn't show up for the design brief. Your father is furious. What is this nonsense about a note and a ring? I'm going to call the police if you don't tell me exactly where you are right now." His words, filled with the demands of my former life, the meetings, the schedules, the police hit me like a wave of cold water. He was anchoring me to earth, forcing me to recognize the consequences of my flight. "I can't go back, Tom," I said, my voice barely a whisper, though it held more conviction than any professional presentation I'd ever given. "This is not nonsense. This is my life. I'm doing something I have to do. Stop it. This is insane, Lily. I know you're upset about the promotion, but running off with some ridiculous treasure map from your lunatic aunt. You have a career, a wedding, a future. Don't destroy it over a delusion." His voice cracked with genuine distress, and I felt a pang of guilt not for leaving him, but for misleading him for so long. He wasn't a bad person. He was just perfectly content with the gilded cage, and he couldn't comprehend that I was not. I looked from the portal, humming its invitation, to the phone, radiating the suffocating expectation of my family. I had to choose, right now, with every particle of my being. "I'm sorry, Tom," I finally stated, my tone firm and irrevocable. "My life is not a blueprint you or my father can finalize. I've made my choice." I hung up, silencing the frantic dial tone, and threw the phone against the stone wall. The small satisfying smash was the sound of the last tie snapping. I turned fully toward the portal. It was huge now, fully stabilized, rippling with promise. I took a deep, steadying breath, gripping the keystone in one hand and the locket in the other. I stepped forward, passing through the sheer, shimmering plain. The moment I stepped onto that strange, moss-covered ground, the air tasted clean for the first time in my life, crisp with an unidentifiable, sweet metallic scent. The cold stone of the lighthouse vanished. I was surrounded by a strange, humming silence and a gravity that felt lighter, almost buoyant. I looked back, and the portal immediately began to shrink, swirling and fading until it was nothing more than a faint wisp of purple vapor, leaving only the bare ancient rock of the floating island beneath my feet. I had crossed the threshold. I was in Erthos. I was finally where I was meant to be, and I knew I couldn't go back. Not yet, perhaps never. The first sensation in Erthos was the air, thin, cool, and exhilarating, carrying the faint, high-pitched ringing sound that accompanied the flow of the ether. I stood on a patch of strangely springy, iridescent moss that covered the surface of a floating landmass. Below me, instead of ground, was a luminous, silver sky, dotted with other drifting islands of various sizes, like geological clouds. The gravity was distinctly lighter, giving me a dizzying feeling of buoyancy, as if I might simply float away if I moved too quickly. My first act was one of an architect assessment. The structure of this world defied physics. The landmasses were held together, not by bedrock, but by massive, twisting crystalline formations that glowed internally with the same emerald light as the keystone. These crystals were the conductors of the ether, the life force of this realm. The landscape was beautiful, but there was an unsettling stillness about it, a sense of deep fragility. I consulted Clara's journal. She had written that the most stable location nearest the entry point was a settlement known as Skymarks. Following her drawn map, which suddenly made impossible three-dimensional sense, I began walking. The environment was silent, save for the wind and the high-pitched hum. I walked cautiously, the air of the city, the noise, the haste, the incessant demands, already seeming impossibly distant, a nightmare from which I had just awakened. After perhaps an hour, the isolation broke. Ahead, nestled between two towering, moss-covered crags, was a village. It didn't sit on the land, it hung from it. Intricate networks of rope bridges, wooden platforms, and what looked like woven vines connected small, domed dwellings that were carved directly into the crystal formations. This was Skymarks, a gravity-defying marvel of organic architecture. As I stepped onto the first wooden ramp, a voice, raspy but clear as glass, spoke. I recognized the locket, child of the surface. I spun around. Sitting on a bench carved from a piece of glowing crystal, was an old woman. She was tiny, almost swallowed by a voluminous cloak of woven dark fibers, and her face was a roadmap of wrinkles. Yet her eyes, a startling shade of deep violet, were sharp and intelligent. My name is Lily Morgan, I managed, clutching the keystone protectively inside my jacket. I am Alara, she replied, nodding slowly. We knew you would arrive when the veil thinned. Your Aunt Clara spoke of you often. She called you the architect of possibility. Alara explained everything with a quiet certainty that instantly calmed my panic. Erthos, she confirmed, was dying. The ether veil, the energetic membrane that sustained their floating ecosystem, was weakening, a process that began centuries ago, when my ancestor first breached the dimensional barrier. The crystal islands were slowly losing their buoyancy, and the village of Skymarks was barely clinging to existence. The keystone is the final mechanism, Ilara revealed, her violet eyes locking onto mine. And the locket, the tuning device, must be sacrificed to truly seal and strengthen the veil. Your architectural lineage means you understand the structure, the balance, required to weave the veil back together. I realized my skills were not just a metaphor. They were literally the key to the solution. I was a structural engineer for a collapsing reality. But before I could fully absorb this momentous responsibility, Ilara's expression turned grim. You were followed, she whispered, leaning closer, the smell of burnt incense faint on her cloak. Not from your world, but within this one. There are others who want the keystone not to save Erthos, but to ensure its complete destruction. She explained that a splinter group, led by a ruthless woman named Viridia, believed that by completely draining Erthos of its remaining ether, they could divert that power to Earth, creating a world of unlimited, reckless material power. They were opportunists, descendants of the ancient rivals of my family's ancestor, who still resented the shared link. They had been watching for the alignment, waiting for the arrival of the next Morgan. As if on cue, a sudden shadow fell over the village. It wasn't a cloud. It was a sleek, dark vasillacraft. I hadn't noticed before descending rapidly from the luminous sky. It was sharp, angular, and made of polished dark metal that absorbed all the light. A stark contrast to the soft, organic structures of St. Viridia's scouts, Elara breathed, pushing me urgently toward a hidden opening in the crystal wall. They want the keystone, they are fast, and they show no mercy. You must hide. The journey to the Ethervale Tangle is difficult, but necessary. Hurry, Lily. You are the only one who can stop this. I scrambled into the dark, narrow crevice, clutching the locket and the crystal tightly. The fear was sharp, visceral, but mixed with a furious determination. I had come seeking purpose, and here it was, a desperate high-stakes fight for existence itself. I realized being here wasn't about finding myself. It was about saving something much bigger, something profoundly beautiful that my ancestor had damaged. I had allies, I had a mission, and now, I had enemies. My adventure had just become a race for survival. Elara guided me out of sky marks, through a series of twisting, vine-covered tunnels, that eventually opened onto a precarious, thin ridge of crystal. The sleek, dark vessel of Viridia's scouts hovered above the village, its angular shadow moving like a predator. We couldn't outrun them in the open sky. Our path led downward, into what Elara called the Ethervale Tangle, energy-conducting forest that grew directly from the massive, pulsing conduits that managed Erthes's buoyancy. The tangle was a sensory overload. Instead of trees, huge, luminous crystalline structures soared hundreds of feet into the air. These were the primary ether conduits, humming with raw, unstable energy. The air was thick and humid, filled with glowing spores and the metallic sweet scent of power. It felt like walking through the circuitry of a colossal, living machine. Elara moved with a quiet urgency, her small frame navigating the maze of roots and secondary conductors, while I, weighed down by my earthly body and architectural instincts, struggled to keep up. Look, Lily. Elara pointed with a slender finger. The damage. She indicated a conduit the size of a redwood tree. Near its base, the crystal had fractured, looking brittle and dull. A thick, dark sludge, like congealed oil, leaked from the crack, poisoning the surrounding moss and causing the nearby floating land to tilt dangerously. This wasn't merely a hole. It was a structural failure in the heart of their world's power grid. The flow must be redirected, Elara explained, her voice grave. It needs a new shunt, a precise geometric correction, to stabilize the flux. This is where your knowledge of equilibrium and stress points is vital. We must mend the break before that island falls entirely. My hands were shaking, but my mind suddenly cleared, snapping into the familiar, cold focus of an engineer facing a catastrophic failure. I pulled out a small sketchpad, instinctively ignoring the fantastical setting, and began mapping the force vectors and crystalline grain. I realized the leak wasn't random. It was located at a precise geometric node, a weak point in the crystal's natural growth pattern. To fix it, I needed to create a counter-tension, using a non-corrosive highly conductive medium. Elara provided the medium, a handful of finely ground, iridescent mineral dust she carried in a pouch. The plan was simple, relying on the elegant principle of distributing tension. I had to use the mineral dust to draw a complex, stabilizing pentagonal pattern directly onto the surface of the fractured conduit. effectively creating a structural stitch of energy to redirect the ether flow around the failure point. Working close to the fracture was terrifying. The conduit roared softly, its energy fluctuating wildly, throwing off sparks of emerald light that tasted like ozone. My earthly body felt heavy and clumsy in the strange gravity. But the thrill of using my specialized knowledge for genuine salvation was intoxicating. My hands, once accustomed to drafting perfect, clean lines on paper, were now applying dust to living crystal, building a bridge of pure mathematics between two broken points. I was halfway through the final line of the pentagram when a sharp, cold voice sliced through the humming air. Well, the architect comes to play in the ruins. I froze, heart dropping into my stomach. Standing on a nearby crystalline root, flanked by two armed scouts, was a woman. She was tall, lean, and strikingly beautiful, with eyes that held the hard, polished gleam of black ice. This had to be Give me the keystone, child of the surface, she commanded, her voice low and utterly devoid of mercy. You can go back to your boring world of concrete and finance. This power is far too great for your trivial mind. I gripped the keystone tighter in my pocket. I'm here to fix what my ancestor broke, I stated, surprised by the steady strength in my own voice. Fix, Viridia laughed, a cold, dry sound. No, you're here to save a pathetic, stagnant reality. Erthos must fall, so the power can flow freely to our people on the surface. It's the natural correction. That keystone is the final stopper, and I intend to shatter it. As she took a step toward me, one of her scouts lunged. Alara cried a warning, but I was already moving. I reacted not with a warrior's instinct, but with an engineer's. I dodged the scout's grab and shoved him hard against the fractured conduit. The sudden raw contact overloaded the unstable energy field. A massive surge of green light erupted from the conduit. The scout screamed as he was thrown back, momentarily stunned. The chaotic energy burst also knocked me off balance, but I used the fleeting opportunity. I completed the final line of the pentagram with a desperate sweep of the mineral dust. Instantly, the frantic roaring of the conduit softened. The leak sealed itself with a flash of intense white light, and the dark sludge vanished. The surrounding moss regained its iridescent sheen, and the tilting landmass above stabilized with a low, satisfying groan. The geometric stitch had worked. Viridia glared at me, her expression a mask of pure, murderous rage. Clever girl, but that was a mere conduit. You cannot fix the veil itself. The keystone will be mine. Before she could recover, Alara grabbed my arm. We must go. You bought us precious seconds. We scrambled away, plunging deeper into the confusing, light-dappled labyrinth of the tangle, leaving Viridia and her furious scouts behind us. I was bruised, terrified, but triumphant. I had used my architectural skills in a fantastical setting, facing physical danger for the first time, and I had won. It was the most alive I had ever felt. We traveled for another grueling day, ascending through the misty upper strata of Erthos. The air grew colder, and the buoyancy became more pronounced, forcing us to move with careful, measured steps. Alara, despite her age, moved with the tireless efficiency of someone who intimately understood every whisper of this land. We were aiming for the highest point of a central floating continent, a place shrouded in perpetual haze, where the original breach in the ether veil had occurred centuries ago. When we finally emerged above the cloud line, the sight took my breath away. Perched on the stark, flat surface of the island was an ancient, crumbling temple. It wasn't built of stone or crystal. It was carved from a single, dark, glass-like substance that pulsed faintly with a deep violet light, like a dying star. This was the place where my ancestor, seeking power and knowledge, had first ripped open the fabric between our worlds. Inside the temple, the air was silent and heavy, charged with residual energy and the ghosts of past actions. In the center of the main chamber was a circular altar, etched with the same complex geometry found on my locket and the keystone. This was the focus point, the epicenter of the ancestral transgression. Ilara placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip surprisingly strong. "We are here, Lily. This is the truth of your legacy, and where your choice must be made." She led me to the altar. There, the truth of the Morgan bloodline was revealed in its horrifying entirety. She explained that when my ancestor created the initial, unstable link, he didn't just take energy. He created a permanent, parasitic tether. This tether allowed the abundance of Erthos to flow subtly into his life on Earth, ensuring wealth and success for his descendants, the Morgan dynasty, but it simultaneously drained the ether veil. The curse we carried wasn't merely spiritual hollowness, it was the manifestation of a massive, unpayable, magical debt. We had been slowly stealing the life from a parallel world for generations. The only way to truly restore the veil, to heal the damage and prevent future incursions, is to sever the link completely, Ilara stated, her voice resonating in the silent chamber. The keystone will focus the remaining ether and mend the fissure. The locket, the original tuning device, must be the sacrifice. Its destruction will collapse the tether, ensuring that no one, not even Viridia, can ever cross again. Then came the terrible part, the choice that cleaved my spirit in two. The tether is connected to the individual, Lily. You, as the current wielder of the locket, are the nexus point. If you activate the final ritual here, you must choose where you wish to remain. The collapse of the link will permanently lock you into one world, forever separating you from the other. If I chose to return to Earth, I would be free of the curse. But I would leave behind this beautiful, strange world and Ilara, and the brief, exhilarating sense of purpose I had found. I would return to the world of concrete, a world that was still Tom's and my father's. But I would be alone, with a secret no one would ever believe. If I chose to stay in Erthos, I would be the architect of its renewal, finding the fulfillment I craved, but I would be permanently cut off from my family, from the memory of home, and from any chance of ever proving to Tom that I wasn't just chasing a delusion. Freedom had a terrifying price. It demanded the complete sacrifice of the known. The weight of the decision was crushing, far heavier than the burden of the vice presidency. That was merely a job title. This was destiny. I looked at the shimmering keystone, then at the dull silver locket in my palm, the object that represented both my inheritance and my escape route. I wanted the freedom of Erthos, but the thought of never seeing the familiar green fields of Earth, of never hearing the rain on a simple glass window pane again, was a deep, aching grief. Clara knew this, I whispered, realizing the depth of her sacrifice. She had been searching for the answer, preparing the ritual, knowing she might not survive the choice. Ilara simply watched, her old eyes patient and wise. She hoped you would find the courage she lacked in the end. A great power demands a great sacrifice, Lily. You must choose now, for Viridia will be upon us before the sun crosses that ridge. I closed my eyes, breathing in the cold, ancient air of the temple. I ran through my life on Earth, calculating the joy against the obligation. I ran through my brief, exhilarating time in Erthos, weighing the risk against the profound sense of belonging. The emptiness I felt in the ballroom was a hollow where the ether should be. Erthos needed structural integrity. It needed me. It wasn't about escaping a boring life anymore. It was about choosing a destiny, I realized. It was about taking responsibility for a legacy I never asked for, and finally, truly building something of my own. My choice became clear, solidifying in my heart, like curing concrete. I knew which world held my purpose, which world held my future. I just had to survive the final encounter to claim it. Ilara was right. The moment I placed the keystone upon the dark, shimmering altar, the air around the temple began to churn. Not with the natural currents of Erthos, but with the violent disturbance of Viridia's approaching vessel. The violet light, emanating from the temple walls, intensified, reacting to the enormous amount of concentrated energy being funneled into the central focus point. I gripped the locket, the cold metal a final, grounding link to my past, as Ilara began chanting ancient, resonant words, her voice wavering slightly with the immense effort of concentrating the ether. "They are here," Ilara warned, her eyes fixed on the entrance. "You must begin the sequence now. It requires precision, Lily, the same geometry you use to distribute weight on a skyscraper." My hands moved instinctively, guided by the instructions I had memorized from Clara's journal. I placed the keystone in the center of the altar's etchings. The crystal flared, projecting a web of emerald light across the floor and ceiling, defining the precise parameters of the dimensional wound. I was the architect of this ceremony, the final builder of the bridge to Erthos's salvation. Just as I prepared to position the locket, the heavy, dark glass door of the temple exploded inward. Viridia strode in, her 2 scouts flanking her, their dark metal armor gleaming dangerously. Her expression was triumphant, cold, and utterly terrifying. She held a strange, angular device in her hand, a tool designed to disrupt the ether veil, accelerating its collapse. "Such dramatic flair, Morgan," Viridia sneered, her voice echoing off the silent walls. "Trying to play the savior. This world is finished. It's an empty vessel, and you're merely trying to seal the lid before I can drain the last drops." I ignored her, focusing entirely on the ritual geometry. I saw the problem in the energy field, a massive, unstable gap in the pattern created by the ancestors' breach. I knew that plunging the locket in randomly would fail, incinerating both the artifact and the ritual. I had to create a temporary, stabilizing field before the final sacrifice. "Don't you understand?" Viridia advanced, her steps heavy on the ancient floor. "I am doing what your cowardly ancestor started. I will take this power and use it to build a true dynasty on Earth, free of sentimentality, free of weak morals." Ilara screamed a warning as one scout raised a weapon, but I was already moving. I didn't reach for the locket yet. Instead, I grabbed a handful of the fine, iridescent mineral dust Ilara carried, the same dust I used to fix the conduit. With a desperate, sweeping motion, I threw the dust high into the air, aiming for the ceiling directly above the altar. The mineral dust immediately reacted to the intense ether energy surging from the keystone. It didn't just scatter. It coalesced, forming a brief, dazzling pentagonal canopy that flashed above the altar. This wasn't a weapon. It was a distraction, a stabilizing scaffold of pure geometric energy. "Now, Lily, the focus point is stable," Ilara yelled. I didn't hesitate. Viridia, momentarily blinded and confused by the light show, lunged for the keystone on the altar. I moved faster, utilizing the strange, low gravity of Erthos to leap onto the altar itself. Viridia's fingers brushed the crystal just as I seized the locket, the silver metal intensely hot against my skin. I jammed the locket, the tuning device, into the final, empty nexus point on the altar, the point that represented the original tether. The moment the locket made contact, the world dissolved into pure, raw energy. The violet light from the temple walls merged violently with the emerald light of the keystone, creating a blinding, roaring column of white light that shot straight up through the shattered ceiling of the temple. The sound was deafening, the scream of two realities being forcibly separated. Viridia shrieked, a sound of fury and betrayal, as the sheer energy blasted through her and her scouts backward, away from the altar. I felt the immense pull of the collapsing tether. My vision swam. I had chosen to stay in Erthos, dedicating myself to its renewal. The tether fought against my choice, trying to snap me back to Earth, to the safety of my unchosen life. But my resolve, solidified in the dark temple hours before, held firm. I was the Nexus, and I was choosing my own destiny. The light subsided, leaving a ringing silence and the pervasive smell of ozone. The altar was intact, but the locket was gone, consumed entirely by the immense energy required to collapse the tether. Viridia and her scouts were nowhere to be seen, likely thrown clear off the central island. I stood over the altar, breathing hard, heart pounding with the exhilarating exhaustion of a battle won. The keystone pulsed steadily, its emerald glow now soft and regular, a sign of stable, flowing ether. I didn't know if I would burn up or disappear. I only knew that I had finally, truly, built something that mattered. Erthos was saved, and I was exactly where I needed to be. The silence that followed the collapse of the tether was not empty, but profound. It was the silence of a successful surgical procedure, of a wound finally closed. I stood unmoving on the ancient altar, my entire body humming with residual ether energy. My hands, scorched by the heat of the locket's destruction, trembled slightly, but my heart was steady, beating with a rhythm that finally felt aligned with my true self. The keystone pulsed a gentle, rhythmic, emerald light, confirming the stabilization of the veil. Erthos was safe. Ilara slowly approached the altar, her violet eyes shining with tears that never fell. She looked exhausted, but utterly serene. "It is done, Lily Morgan," she whispered, her voice husky. "The link is closed. The debt is paid. The curse is lifted, on both your world and ours. And you are home." Her words brought a rush of emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. Relief, certainly, but also a deep, aching grief. The choice was irrevocable. Earth was now sealed away, a place I could never return to, a dream that would slowly fade into memory. I would never know if Tom managed to explain my disappearance, or if my father ever stopped being furious. I would never again walk into the sunlight of a world I understood implicitly. The sacrifice was complete. I had traded a life of comfort for a life of boundless, demanding purpose. Ilara presented me with the keystone. It was no longer a frantic, unstable mechanism, but a smooth, warm pendant set onto a silver chain, now a beautiful piece of jewelry that rested lightly against my collarbone. It was the mark of my new role. "The keystone holds the blueprint of Erthos's renewal," Ilara explained. "It is now yours. You are the nexus, the bridge between forgotten knowledge and future necessity. You are the architect of Earth." We descended from the temple and returned to Skymarks, where the small community awaited. They greeted us not with wild celebration, but with quiet gratitude and a sober recognition of the monumental task ahead. The ether veil was stabilized, but the environment was still fragile, requiring dedicated, sustained effort to recover from centuries of slow decay. My days, which once consisted of drafting impersonal, sterile office towers, were now filled with the joyous, messy work of rebuilding a reality. I worked alongside Elara, studying the natural growth patterns of the massive conductor crystals, learning how to channel the ether to fortify the floating islands. My knowledge of structural integrity, previously applied to concrete and steel, was now used to design self-sustaining homes that grew from the crystal roots, not merely resting upon them. It was dynamic, beautiful work, where geometry was the language of life. I realized that the feeling of inadequacy that had plagued me on Earth, feeling that I was constantly missing something, was gone. The hollow place in my soul, the symptom of the inherited curse, was filled with the vibrant, pulsing energy of Erthos. I had found the ultimate purpose for my architectural skills, building not just structures, but a sustainable future for an entire world. Sometimes, late in the evening, when the luminous sky was a shifting canvas of blues and silvers, I would look up. I wouldn't look for Earth, knowing that the tether was permanently severed. Instead, I would look at the way the light refracted through the repaired conduits, and the resilient architecture of Skymarks, and I would think of Aunt Clara. She hadn't been mad. She had been a visionary. She had ensured that I, her restless niece, would inherit not a fortune in wealth, but a world of work. I may have lost a conventional life, but I gained an impossible one. I may have traded my diamond engagement ring for a crystal pendant, but the keystone radiated true worth, not mere monetary value. My old life felt like a soft, distant dream, a boring beige blueprint I thankfully never had to execute. Here, every morning, I watch the floating islands drift, and I know I belong. I am Lily Morgan, the architect of destiny, and I have finally found my home in the skies.